social science really, even economics, I would argue, needs to not reduce human experience. Well, kind of the Austrian economists, right? The libertarians have actually made this point. It's not to reduce human experience to what can be measured and quantified, right? Because Mises said value is subjective. So you can't measure it. You can't, there's no way to determine objectively what is valuable and how valuable it is. Anyway, I've gone on too long. Your response, sir.
Well, I mean, there's a million things there.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I wrote a dissertation on the question of like about how we view the world and like about even like what moral theories are trying to do. And one of the things I said was that if you look at the different tools that we have, say in the social sciences, I know you don't like that term, but that's what they're called, so I'll
Sure.
just
Yeah.
call them that.
It's okay.
In the social sciences, we look at humans and how they live together, how they manage to cooperate, how they manage to work together in mass, how they relate to one another, and you get a set of tools from, say, sociology, and even that's simplifying because there's of course disagreement among sociology and different subfields and different methods. You get a number of tools from economics, you get a number of tools from political science, and all these tools in a way have a sort of implicit ontology, a way of like demarcating the world, a way of claiming what causes what, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
um, and none of them are really fully coherent in the way, since that like all the social sciences can't, as at least as of right now, cannot be rendered coherent with each other because they have contradictory ontologies and contradictory theories of cause and effect. Even inside of economics, saying, the way that microeconomists would analyze a phenomenon and the way that macroeconomists would analyze a phenomenon are often just incompatible. And that seems really puzzling at first. And one way to look at that is to think we're in effect building models because we're stupid and we don't really understand the world. We're basically building models where we
Mm.
understand the model and we're kind of saying something like the world, at least for certain subset of problems, thinking of the world as being like this is useful and illuminating. It's not simply a useful black box but it's in a way saying the world is like this is like a way of understanding that world.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think maybe that's the best we can do. And sometimes when I say that about the
Mm.
social sciences or philosophy, people go, that can't possibly be right. I mean, that's just incoherent. But then I point out to the fact that like when it comes to, say, physics, we're in the same boat right now. Like
Mm-hmm.
quantum mechanics is very good for explaining certain things. General relativity is good for explaining other things, like the dust dancing around my head. You'd want to explain that with quantum mechanics, but
Mm.
the fact that the pencil falls, actually just use Newtonian mechanics for that. But fundamentally, you'd use relativistic physics as our best theory of gravity right now.
Right.
But those things are not compatible. But they're still useful models. Or to take something that everyone remembers from high school, the ideal gas law, PV equals nRT. There are no ideal gases anywhere in the universe. The gases that I'm surrounded by, they're not ideal. They don't exist.
Right.
But even though it's a simplified model, for certain domains of issues, it provides a very good explanation. So
Mm.
perhaps the
Mm.
problem we run into as scientists, as social scientists, as
Mm.
philosophers, is when we become so in love with the model that we try to make everything fit it even when it can't. And so just as an analogy for that,
Yeah.
if you think about
Right.
like imagine like the following, I'm making like an oval. Well, you could describe the orbit. If imagine like this oval's going on my finger, you could describe like the orbit that I'm using, that I make with my pencil here, using circles and epicycles. You can definitely, so like pretty much, I think mathematically speaking, works at like almost any kind of weird
Right.
path. You can use circles and epicycles to explain it. It's just at a certain point, you add on too many epicycles, it becomes overly convoluted and ad hoc. I think that's the problem we run into with their theories. Like they're pretty good for explaining certain things. We try to extend them beyond the domain that they're useful for. It's worth
Yeah.
doing that because it's worth seeing how much sort of cognitive utility you can get out of them. But at a certain point, you have to go, all right, this is not the right tool for the job. Let me look for another tool. It'd be
Right.
great to have a grand unified theory of everything, but humans are stupid. We don't have it yet. Maybe
Their
we
ex-
never will.
yeah, their explanatory power is quite limited, right?
Yeah.
These models are just, as I think I'm summing up what you're saying, they are designed to answer specific, discrete questions.
Yeah.
They are not, here's what they're not designed for, and this is really the root of my problem with it. They are not designed for true intellectuals. True intellectuals never stop having questions, right? They're always curious. And so once the model accurately explains why your pencil fell, um, we have, those of us who care about ideas and are just curious would say, well, okay, which direction is the pencil falling in, though, buddy? How do you know it's down? hello, look at a picture of the Earth from outer space and tell me which is up and which is down. And I could go on. Like, what is the meaning of that? Why do we care about that? Why is gravity so important to us? What have been the effects of us discovering gravity? Or should we say maybe we invented gravity? And that, it just, there's, and that, those are just my questions, right? I mean, other people who are interested in ideas for them in themselves in a way will have their own questions beyond what the damn model, what Newton told us, right? So yeah, it's a reductive thing, and I find that thinkers who are, the more closely attached a thinker is to a model, and doesn't matter what the model is, the less interesting I find them. I don't think they're less intelligent. I don't think any of that. I just find it uninteresting because it's like, I don't know. It is like evaluating Michael Jordan simply by his statistics and his wins. I mean, come on. I mean, if you watch him, there was so much else going on with Michael Jordan, both on the court and off the court, that statistics will tell you nothing about, or very little about. So that's all. I guess I just find it like, yeah, it's this game of reductionism in a sense. It's like, how do we reduce a question to the fewest components possible so that we can explain it more readily, right? The simpler and fewer and less complicated it is, the more easily the model can explain it. But.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it could or it might not. It sort of depends on the issue. So in a way, if you think about like going back to the metaphor of the orbit, in a way, when we switch from having circular orbits with epicycles to recognizing, as Kepler argued, that it's better to think of them as ovals, as ellipses.
Right.
In a way, we've made the model more complicated because now we have two. I'm making this too mathy, but we have two focal points rather than one focus.
Right.
But in that case, adding something on made it more powerful, made the math simpler, had more explanatory power. In some cases, reducing the number of explanatory components ends up being more powerful. I guess I think it's like a case by case basis where we discover that. So the real issue is like you don't want to become in love with the model at the point of denying the phenomena that you're trying to explain. So you don't want to get to a situation where you're like, my model doesn't allow for this to happen, so if I see it happening, I must say that it's not real. And that's the problem you get into. But I see what you're saying, and I agree with a lot of it. But there's also a part of me that maybe you don't mean something like this. But was it the poet Alexander Pope who had this line about how Newton ruined everything because he looked at the stars and came up with mathematical formula to explain their motion? Oh, yeah. And I'm like, dude, I've read Newton. I've learned a lot of physics, and I got to tell you what, I appreciate the stars a lot more thanks to physicists than I have thanks to any poet. I don't think you poets are anywhere near them. Like astronomers and physicists have got you beat for understanding the majesty of stars. Oh. You can have all the little pretty metaphors you want at the end of the day, but like understanding the internal mechanics of a star the way that an astronomer does, that's way more magnificent than any of the garbage that Pope ever said.
Are you saying it's objectively true, that it's more explanatory and more I mean, in other words, wait, like, you're not discounting the possibility that someone out there could gain more from the poet's descriptions of stars than from physics.
I mean, yeah, certainly there are probably people who gain more from the poet's descriptions than others. There are people who find a lot more joy in playing The Witcher 3 on Xbox than they do from like having a child or like trekking a mountain or seeing an ocean. People have all sorts of interesting experiences, but I would say, like, what physicists and astronomers have taught us about what stars are actually doing is a lot more magnificent than the various metaphors that people came up with before they really understood them. They're like, it's some blinking light in the sky. No, it's actually there are these atoms being smashed together, and this creates all this heat. And look at how it convects. It's like the thing, when you actually learn what the thing is, maybe if you give the information to like a really good pope, maybe if I could go back to Alexander Pope, if that's his name, and say, here's what we think stars are as of 2021. Like now that you understand that, like that's
Okay.
our best sort of account, maybe you can write some even better poetry that would evoke even better things. You know, in a way, your problem was you're seeing them from afar, and there's something really cool about seeing them from afar. But now that you can see a little bit more of them, maybe you can say something better.